Good afternoon and welcome to this afternoon's episode of Challenges in the Street. We're live here from the Public Safety Training Academy. I'm Battalion Chief Mark Davis, and this afternoon our discussion is going to be about some building construction stuff related to high-rise buildings and the built-upon environment. As always, a couple things to handle ahead of time. One, this is slated for a 60-minute episode. There is the potential of some discussion occurring, and of course that might go over 10 minutes or so. We'll let you know if we think that's going to happen during the episode. If you're a certified chief officer wishing to receive COPDI credit, then please do so using the form that gets submitted via Quick Links. So if you paid attention to the radio in the last, I'll say 10 days, it may be a shorter time period than that. There's been three pretty significant fires that occurred up county in Battalion 3, Battalion 5 area, 2 in Clarksburg, 1 in Montgomery Village. And the common feature of all of those, they were fires that started on the exterior, or at least appeared to be on the exterior upon arrival, and companies did the right thing. The first line goes to the rear. We heard that in our From the Command Post Boss Talk episode, where we had the entrapment on Whetstone Drive. That decision to take that line to the rear was critical to Tower 8 getting into that second floor to do a search. So if we don't mind putting a couple of the photos up, the first three are from the first fire in Clarksburg, and that was on the A shift. So let's go back to the brick in the front. Yeah, so that's the side A of the building. We know Clarksburg, it's been in place for a while now, 15 plus years, close to that anyway. One of our concerns are always close proximity of other houses. And this house had a lot of fire on arrival through the roof on arrival. It looks like it appeared to start out back and then spread up. It was a townhouse. You can see this is the side Charlie of that. The decision was to get that line to the rear, darken that fire down before they moved in. And so companies worked well and accomplished that task. A lot of wind that day. That was one of the concerns, driving that wind, and then, of course, fire in the attic space. So good job to those companies. There should be an after-action report. Actually, that just came out. Chief Coletti, who was the IC, he put that out. They cut that loose a couple days ago, if not yesterday. Similar fire, the next photo. I want to say this may have been the next day. Looking for the next photo. Yep, so this is another Clarksburg fire. Again, it started on the rear, and this is the rear of the building, spread up and out in that vinyl siding. Again, companies did a good job, got back in there with the first line, got water on that fire, and then were able to get inside. Was not as extensive as a fire as the first, but clearly the tactics prevailed and stopped the fire from getting into that attic space and running the whole length of the whole back side. And then this is our last photo, and that was a smaller fire, but again, this is side Charlie. I believe this is an end-unit townhouse in Montgomery Village, kind of where 8 and 17 come together. And they went on the scene with some smoke in the house, and actually the fire's in the back side of that chimney. One of those wooden chimneys. We've seen those fires before. Not sure if the person was using the chimney or not, but anyway, at the end of the day, line to the rear, stop that fire, stop that from getting up into that attic space and running horizontal in those buildings. So all three of those, if you think about it, maybe 15 years ago, we've been talking about the first line in the front door and doing those kind of things. We have done a really good job in discussion with chief officers. We've done a really good job with our company officers realizing the importance of fast water, especially on an exterior fire, if that means you're giving up your first line to go to the rear and get water on the outside so that other crews can make entry on the inside. So good job on all that. That's what we're looking for, and all three of those events went well. So today is some building construction stuff, and I don't want to delay that any further. I'm going to turn it over to Captain Brady Miller, who's going to be the moderator for today. Captain Miller.
Chief, thank you very much. So let me go ahead and get started. Immediately to my left here, everybody should know Captain Machala is assigned to Company 9, but currently works doing a phenomenal job with facilities. And across from me is Chris Hallock, Captain at Rockville. So tell us about what brings you here today and what you're going to talk about.
Yeah, thank you, Captain Miller. So my background is, of course, I'm a captain assigned to Station 3 with the Rockville Volunteer Fire Department, but I'm a fire protection engineer. I went to the University of Maryland, College Park, got my bachelor's, my master's, and I also am a licensed state of Maryland fire protection engineer. I've had the absolute pleasure of being able to work in private consulting as a fire protection engineer with a lot of buildings in Montgomery County in our first two areas. So that's really the exigence of why I wanted to be able to give this presentation to help the gap between our personnel on the MCFRS side and the LFRD side with what our actual built environment looks like and what construction codes look like when they're formulated into buildings like this.
Okay, good. So,
thank you. So the general goals of this presentation are going to be these 4 bullets on the screen. Really just want to introduce the concept of building codes and construction, present components and features of buildings that are relevant to the fire service for our personnel operating on incidents, and exhibit what these features look like in our built environment. All of the photos that I'm providing on the screen are from buildings within Montgomery County or adjoining jurisdictions. And then lastly, this is where I'm hoping to get a lot of feedback from y'all and also those that are tuning in, is discuss the considerations and implications that these changes to fire service features and building construction have on our operations as a fire department. So this is our general agenda here. We're going to start with an introduction to building codes, talk about changes in the built environment, why these changes occur and what they look like. And then we're going to dive right into fire service features, which is really the body of the presentation, what should be of the most interest here. I'm breaking this presentation up into 2 parts, with part 1 being done right now, of course, and hopefully doing part 2 at a later date to be able to dive in as well. There's just a lot of context, a lot of material within all these items. I want to make sure I'm not rushing through anything while still being able to get to everything within a reasonable time period. So we'll dive right in. Introduction into building codes. This is something that I feel like a lot of our personnel have some familiarity with, but understanding how building codes works is a really complex thing. Really, the way building codes work is that they're adopted at a state level, like for us is, of course, the state of Maryland, and then they are amended and enforced by local jurisdictions. But there's many kinds of local jurisdictions that exist within Montgomery County itself. Montgomery County is one of them, Montgomery County government, but there's also other local jurisdictions like City of Rockville, City of Gaithersburg. Federal jurisdictions like NIH, NIST, or even Walter Reed will have their own authority-having jurisdictions. So that's why we see so many differences in building construction, even within our own borders, because we have different authority-having jurisdictions.
So a code that was adopted by the state doesn't necessarily mean in downtown Rockville or Tacoma Park or that's going to be the code?
It will, but with different amendments. So like you asked about the City of Rockville, right here on the screen we can see on the right, the currently adopted codes by the City of Rockville. The codes are generally going to be the same within a state in terms of what they adopt, with exception to obscure jurisdictions like the federal government. But the City of Gaithersburg practically adopts the same codes as the City of Rockville, which practically adopts the same codes as Montgomery County, International Building Code, NFPA 1, which is the state fire code, NFPA 101, which is the state life safety code. However, their individual amendments to each of these codes will change based on the jurisdiction. The City of Rockville, for example, will have different amendments to the fire code or the life safety code or the building code than Montgomery County will. And then also the pacing and their timeline of additions in which they adopt will also vary as well. Currently, the state just adopted the 2021 edition of the International Building Code, but local jurisdictions have yet to catch up to adopt it because they're given a grace period to do so. So coming soon, we will start to see the 2021 edition of the International Building Code adopted by these local jurisdictions.
Is it realistic that I, as a operations person, know these?
Absolutely not. I don't think it's necessary for our personnel to know the current addition, all the amendments to our building codes. Rather, it's important to recognize how they change across their jurisdictions. At Company 3, at Station 3, we respond to buildings within the City of Rockville, but also outside of the City of Rockville. Having an understanding that the buildings are under different jurisdictions and might have variances between them gives context to the changes in the built environment.
But does age do the same thing? Is age just like jurisdiction?
Absolutely, and we'll get into that in a couple of slides, but building codes change over time too, which is why this matters, why the adoption cycles matter, because with each adoption cycle of a new code, that requires new things to be put into building construction, new fire service features, which we're going to go on into. So going right into what we were talking about, Captain, the context of this presentation really is changes to the built environment. I showed this photo on the screen. This is on Pooks Hill Road, the new 2-tower residential apartment being built on Pooks Hill Road. It's actually one of my projects. This is one of the first, if not the first, in the state of Maryland to utilize the prescient design system for lightweight steel construction. This is classified as a high-rise residential building of type 2 construction. But if you look at it, the lightweight steel construction framing members are all like steel studs. There's no steel columns, there's no I-beams, it's all lightweight steel construction. So this is just an example.
How many stories is that?
It's going to be 11 stories.
Oh,
yeah.
So it's not limited to the 5, like the wood frame that were these new donut buildings, for example.
Correct. This is classified as non-combustible lightweight steel frame construction, which is a relatively newer concept in the building code. And that's why we're seeing changes even as recent within the last 5 years of buildings just being built dramatically different than what we have seen prior. So continuing on the topic of old versus new construction, the building fire and life safety codes are, of course, constantly changing. And that's why not all old buildings are the same as new buildings, and in fact, quite different. On the screen here, we have a good example right there in downtown Rockville, the Americana Center number 4 and 118 Monroe Street. These are high-rise residential buildings, not sprinklered. And then on the right photo, we have some newer residential high-rise buildings. These are number 44 Maryland and 33 Monroe Street. These are fully sprinklered, brand new fire service systems. This gives context to why a building just a couple blocks away from each other might look completely different. Another thing to consider is that within Montgomery County, developers are constantly reusing buildings because sometimes it's cheaper just to reuse a building than to rebuild. A good example of this is on the top photo here. This is 1500 Research Boulevard. This is an old 1980s era unsprinklered office building that's now being converted to a wet lab space. Montgomery County, we love our research labs. So they're using flammable materials in this lab like alcohols, and that requires them now to retrofit a sprinkler system throughout the whole building because of this new use. So this is why, even though you might know a building, the building might be the same, the elements within and the components within the building will change throughout their use. The bottom photo here, a lot of people from H recognize this as the Holiday Inn Gaithersburg, number 2 Montgomery Village Avenue. This building was actually originally constructed with just that hotel tower on the right. They added that wing on the north side, on the left side of that photo there afterwards. And even though this is still one building, this building addition made it so the new hotel portion was built very much differently than the old hotel portion. And we'll go into some examples of those fire service features and how they're exhibited in these examples in this presentation.
So I think this beginning part, Chris, you're talking about the codes and all that kind of stuff. Is it fair to say for the people that are, the companies that are out there and the individuals that go out to these buildings, that regardless of age, occupancy type and use and type of construction, they still need to be aware of all these these fire protection features and to look for them because they could change based on all that, right? So that's why the recognition of them is so important.
Absolutely, right? Absolutely. Even during the life of a building, it will change inherently, right? It will go into renovations. They might add new systems. They might fully replace floors. They might completely gut a building and then put new stuff in. The use will also change too. This is all stuff that we're seeing kind of develop itself in the built environment in general, but especially Montgomery County, given how many older style buildings that we have that want to be adaptively reused into more current use.
And when we do that, do we bring it up to whatever the current code is?
Sometimes, and it depends on the level of alterations. Going back to alteration additions, of course, this is something that we could talk about for 8 hours within itself, but it's a unique thing to understand. The state of Maryland was actually the first state nationwide to implement an existing building code. This is before my time, maybe about 20 years ago, but the state of Maryland recognized the benefit of being able to alter or add additions to existing buildings, but recognize that you can't just take an old building and make it work for current code. It's not that simple. A lot of things just are completely infeasible to alter. So the general provisions are that the level of alterations is in line with the level of the code that needs to be brought up to current compliance. So that's why we see in the top photo with 1500 Research Boulevard, it's an existing office building, but because of its new use as a flammable materials wet lab building, it's going to be provided an automatic sprinkler system. But other features within the building aren't going to need to be upgraded. The existing interior exit stairways in there don't comply with current code requirements, but those don't need to be upgraded. So the level changes, and it's really dependent on the level of alteration that the building is seeing.
Okay.
So with the fire service features, again, we're going to do part 1 today, which is there on the left. But generally, I would like to define fire service features as portions, systems, and equipment of the building that are designed to assist fire department personnel, us, with fire protection and life safety preservation during an emergency incident. So long-winded way of saying basically these are things that we should care about and we should really look out for when we're responding to buildings or when we're pre-planning buildings. Going right into the first one, sprinkler and standpipe systems. I expect everyone tuning in should know what a sprinkler and a standpipe system is, of course, but this is more so to give direction as to why they're there, when they are there, why they may not be present in a building based on its age or its use, and things for us to look out for and pay attention to when we're pre-planning or responding to incidents. So generally speaking, residential buildings by current code are all required to be sprinklered, no matter the size, no matter the height. But we know that within Montgomery County, we have plenty of unsprinkled residential high-rises that have contributed to fatal fire incidences. Sure. So here on the left, we have a photo of number 4 Monroe Street, which is the Americana Center, completely unsprinklered residential high-rise building. The only sprinkler system located in this building is in the basement storage room on the basement level of both 4 and 118 Monroe. But all the living areas, all the dwelling units above grade, completely unsprinklered corridors and units. On the right here, we have a photo showing the opposite of that, where we have a lot of floor control assemblies coming off a sprinkler system. So the general gist of this is that you should be able to very quickly identify whether a building is sprinklered or not, because that, of course, plays into our decision-making process when we are responding to these buildings. This is a good example of a sprinkler retrofit. This is 5901 Montrose. This is the Arrive North Bethesda, it's now called. On the left here, we can see a combination sprinkler standpipe riser. This is actually showing a retrofitted sprinkler system that was installed in, I believe, just the building's corridors. So the building isn't fully sprinklered, and it wasn't always sprinklered. This was an example where about 20 years ago, I assume that Montgomery County Department of Permitting Services required them to provide an additional level of life safety with the sprinkler system as a retrofit because of some alterations that they were doing in the building. Evidence of that as well is shown there, where they have a new fire pump tied in with the existing fire suppression system, which previously appeared to be just on the lower parking garage levels. With that being said, though, this is a relatively newer sprinkler system, right? But if you look on the right here, with the help of a 23A shift after a box alarm at this address, we actually found that a portion of the branch main from for the risers in the parking garage is severely corroded. It was actually tagged out on the FDC saying that severe corrosion, this FDC is out of service. We actually found that this is the riser that goes towards that single sprinkler riser that runs in that stair that supplies the whole building. So this is why it's important to do pre-planning and look at your buildings, because we have a lot of buildings in Montgomery County that may present themselves one way, but you wouldn't really know actually what's within until you take a deeper look. Here's another good example of that, and why it's important to understand the types of sprinkler and standpipe systems that we have. So this is the Mallory Square Apartments off Siesta QA in 32's area. This building is a typical donut-style new construction. We see these popping up all over the county. They're very efficient and they're cost-effective for developers. But here we see that the actual parking garage area is a separate standpipe system than the rest of the building. So we have 2 sets of fire department connections you can see there on the left of the floor plan. And it's not really easy to see on the placards, but one is marked standpipe and the other is marked automatic sprinkler. Now, if we respond to a fire in unit 325, which connections do you want to hit? Well, you'd only know that if you pre-plan, because you might want to say standpipe, but if you look closer at this building, you would realize that that standpipe serves the manual dry standpipe system in only the parking garage. And the connections that say automatic sprinkler actually feed the combination sprinkler standpipe risers in the rest of the building. They're completely separate systems and they're independent of each other.
So where would I get that in? Where do I see that? How do I learn that?
Pre-planning. Pre-planning, discussion with the building engineers, looking at floor plans, or or you just have to have insight on how the building was constructed. In this case, this was the one that I did for work, and I found this out. I was like, I didn't know that before. I've never pre-planned this building, but it was interesting to see, if you get dispatched for the car fire in the parking garage, it's an open parking garage with a dry standpipe system, hey, I got to hit the right connections, or I open that valve, I'm not getting water, because
Yeah.
the fire pump's not feeding that. It's a completely different system, all within the same building.
Or you got to plan on running a long line or a hand line because of the limitations of a dry sprinkler system that's not monitored, expose the elements. So all things,
Exactly.
you're going out there and looking at these things to, go over with the crew.
Right. And again, these are all things that you would only discover while pre-planning. You're not going to figure this out while you're responding to
Yeah.
the incident. Here's some more examples of why it's important to understand the differences of the types of systems, manual versus automatic and wet and dry. Of course, manual standpipe systems are standpipe systems that require the fire department to pressurize the system to achieve the required fire flow. Automatic systems do that with a fire pump. But we kind of see an in-between sometimes. On the right two photos here, these are from 4 and 118 Monroe Street. These are actually booster pumps attached to the domestic water supply, which are ultimately supplying the standpipe systems in the building. Again, these are unsprinkler buildings, so there's no automatic sprinkler system in it. But the standpipe systems are provided with a booster pump, but it's not technically a fire pump. So that's another important implication to make when we're responding to these buildings, like, hey, I need to hit the connections on this building because whether or not this booster pump will work will determine whether I'm supplying water to the fire service personnel on the upper floors or if they're just relying on city pressure. Because in fact, when I went to 118 Monroe Street, this photo on the right, they're still not finished installing this booster pump. Currently, that standpipe system is operating as a manual standpipe system, a manual wet system.
So it's domestic water, whatever the pressure is, WSCC, that's what the whole building has.
And if you're on the 11th floor, that's not going to be enough. We have to pressurize the FDC.
All right, I'm going to have to pause one
Yep.
second. Chief, we have a question, correct?
Yeah, we do. So this question is related to the exterior doors on a donut construction.
Okay.
So it says, they ask, do the doors on the exterior at Siesta, I assume that was that building you showed, or donut construction unlock with an activated fire alarm?
Yes, they're supposed to. And depending on the locking mechanism, typically they're magnetic locks or electric strike. They're all tied into the fire alarm control panel. And even if the fire alarm system is not activated, it's mandated that you can manually unlock them from the fire alarm control panel. And we can talk a little bit more about fire alarm systems when we get into that topic.
Okay.
That's certainly a good question and a good thing to know during your pre-planning as
That
well.
didn't come from the bunk room, did it?
No, it doesn't look so.
Oh, okay.
And then another hot topic with sprinkler and standpipe systems, of course, pressure reducing valves. I don't want to go into discussion of pressure reducing valves too much, but really just to inform our personnel, these are the requirements, these are why that we see them, but also why we don't just see them on fire hose valves, we also see them on sprinkler systems as well. The requirements are similar in the fact that if the system components see an excess static pressure of 175 psi, you're going to see a pressure reducing valve on those components because it's not rated for more than that. And that's what a PRV looks like on a fire hose valve. You should be able to see that plastic sheathing covering what is that spring valve for the actual reducing valve. And here's what one looks like on a sprinkler system on the right.
So we talk about recognition and going out, right? So we can have a whole class on PRVs, but recognition is key. Like you said, obviously there's a couple different types of PRVs out there depending on the vintage. They should all be field adjustable if it's new, right? So what would you say the best suggestion is for a crew? They go out, they see something that looks weird like that on the hand wheel. They think it's a PRV. Is it easy enough to do some research? Like, hey, take a picture of the brand to figure out how to adjust it, or should it be intuitive enough with instructions on it if they, for some reason, needed to adjust the PRV on the field?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say the minimum level would be just identifying. Okay. Knowing, hey, this building I know has PRVs installed. And then the next level on that is doing the research, like you said, Cap, about how we manipulate the PRV, should we need to do so. Also looking at the pressure gauges, okay, what's the static pressure it's actually seeing? And then understanding that if you need to adjust the valve, sometimes they have instructions on them and on how they're field adjustable, sometimes they don't. But doing the back-end research to figure out, okay, what would we do, even just talking through it, what would we do if we encounter a problem here, and how do we?
And there should be 2 gauges, static pressure on the back side of the hose valve, and then on the outlet side of the hose valve.
Exactly, that's what you see
gauge.
here.
Okay.
Yep.
Cool.
Same with on the sprinkler system, which inherently is a little bit of less interest to us when we're responding, right? We care about getting water in our lines, but similar perspectives there on the PRVs. So going into more discussion about sprinkler and standpipe systems, where do we find standpipe hose connections? It seems like a very elementary level question to ask, but at the same time, this is something that is important to recognize as unit officers and the crew operating, where do we hook up? Of course, we see fire hose valves in interior exit stairways out there at the main floor level or the intermediate level landing, depending on the age of the building, because the codes have changed over the years. But also with how, especially mid-rise donut-style construction buildings, again, this is Siesta Key Way here on the right, with how they're broken up, you might have to have hose valves provided at intermediate areas in the corridors just to get your hose reach length. So knowing that your hose valve that's within 200 feet of wherever you need to get to within that dwelling unit might not be in an interior exit stairway. And you might not be able to just go to your interior exit stairway and call out an attack stairwell when the fire hose valve is really just going to be in the corridor where you need to go.
But it is still the rules that
Correct.
200 feet from any point in the building, there needs to be a valve.
Correct. You will have a valve somewhere, but you just need to be able
where
to
it is.
know I might not be looking in an interior exit stairway. There
Yeah.
might be one that's further away.
Chief Davis has a question.
Yes, Chief?
Yeah, so I have a question. I seem to recall, right, was there a period of time where a connection could be in the hallway, but it was every other floor? I felt like there was something that every other floor that could happen, but it couldn't be every floor. Does that make any sense, or am I just lost my mind?
Might be predating my time a little bit. I know that the current requirements are that standpipes need to be provided in every single interior exit stairway, and where the building area is such that you can't reach from that stairway, they need to be provided in intermediate locations like corridors or horizontal exits like shown here. As far as hose valves being provided at alternate floors, I'm not sure if that was ever a requirement.
Yeah, that's okay. I seem to recall some buildings in Bethesda right early on, so that would have been like 1970s, 80s construction. They might still exist today, but I don't know. That's okay. Continue on.
It could be that they were provided only in some levels in the corridors based on that floor layout, which I have seen in some office buildings in the county where some floor plans allow the hose reach to be done from all the fire hose valves in the
An open style
stairways.
floor plan.
Yeah, but if you have long winding corridors, you can't get your hose reach from that stairway. They might provide a fire hose valve to reach that area of the building. So maybe that's what you've seen. Chief.
And there are older buildings that have them only in the hallways, like Hampshire
Yeah.
Towers, Cove
Yeah.
Overlook, or whatever, where there are no outlets in the stairwells, and you got to stretch from the floor below out in the hallway
Exactly.
and manipulate another door. So there's all kinds of weird
We
stuff.
have a
All part
follow-up.
of pre-planning.
We do have a follow-up about distance. Asked that 200 foot, is that to the door of the apartment or includes the apartment or whatever space that is behind that door?
It is a great question. So actually the requirements of NFPA 14, which is the Standpipe code, and the requirements of the International Building Code are different. The NFPA 14 requires that your hose reach is 200 feet, while the International Building Code requires that you can make 100 feet plus 30 feet of hose stream reach. So that kind of means, like, can you reach the dwelling unit door and then reach your stream further on? That's kind of the interpretation there. Regardless, the requirements have changed over the years, and exactly where they're going to be located are dependent on age and how the building has been modified since it was built. New construction, you're going to find fire hose valves practically everywhere. In older buildings, you might not find them at all, right? So these are the implications that we need to consider. So another consideration, like I said, sometimes you might not find them in interior exit stairways depending on the age of the building. On the right two photos here from 2 Montgomery Village Avenue, where the new hotel tower, the addition, has 2 interior exit stairways for that tower, and both are provided with standpipes. In the old hotel tower, there's 3 interior exit stairways, but only 2 of them have standpipes. This one, stair 1 over here, does not have a standpipe. So if you are going up stair 1 and you're not paying attention and you don't notice that there's no standpipes, you call it your attack stairwell, well, it's not going to do you any good, right? You need to go to another stair to get your fire hose.
Yeah.
And then here's a fun photo from 55 West Goody, the Seneca. They just decided to provide hose valves at both the main and intermediate level landings, which isn't required. It's either or. Montgomery County allows either main or intermediate as long as it's consistent throughout the building. But in this building, for some reason, the designer decided to put both. So just a fun little intricacy there. So moving right along into fire alarm, emergency voice alarm systems. I'm certainly not going to read all the text on the screen, but these are the general requirements of when and where they're required. Generally speaking, high-rise buildings require fire alarm systems, and we see that in old and new high-rise buildings. But the type of systems that we see vary based on the age of the building, of course, as well, or when it might have been recently renovated to require a new fire alarm system. The general differences are a fire alarm system is just that, fire alarm, right? occupant notification initiation devices. But an emergency voice alarm system are what we see in new high-rise buildings where you can have programmable evacuation, floor above, floor below, and the fire floor.
How is that determined?
How is the fire floor determined?
Yeah, no. How is that? You said programmable.
Yeah.
Who determines, code obviously determines
Yeah.
that. But is it safe to say that newer buildings, fire floor, floor above, floor below, and top floor?
Yeah, for newer high-rise buildings, yes, because newer high-rise buildings would require an emergency voice alarm communication system, and that's typically how they are programmed. Again, this is something that you would find in your pre-plan when you go there and look at the fire alarm control panel to determine, hey, is this just an audible, like, local alarm, or is this an actual, more robust, modern emergency voice alarm system? Here we have just some photos of different fire alarm components, but it's important to remember that fire alarm isn't just for notification, but also for supervision of your building systems, including sprinkler systems. So we all know we've seen the supervisory high-low on the dry pipe system or the water flow of generating an alarm at 2 in the morning when we don't want to get out of bed. But the fire alarm serves more purpose than just life safety, but also to assist us with targeting and pinpointing, hey, what's going on? Where do we need to go? And that's why when we talk about incident response, identifying in the pre-plan what the type of system is and how it can benefit us is huge. Here we see a good difference of different fire alarm control units. On the left, again, is number 4, 118 Monroe Street. Very simple fire alarm system, right? It doesn't have an emergency voice alarm system because it predates those requirements. You're just going to get the building general alarm. It might light up and tell you what smoke detector and what elevator lobby alarmed, but it's not like a fully addressable modern fire alarm system. Where on the right, we have just that. We have an emergency voice alarm system. We have a PA, digital display. It can tell us the exact address of what the alarm initiating device was, whether it was a smoke detector on the 8th floor, water flow on the 7th. You have a better understanding of what exactly
Where to start.
to. Yeah. And then with that being said, don't forget the graphic annunciator panel. When we say fire alarm panel, it's kind of ambiguous. It can mean one of two things, the fire alarm control unit or the graphic annunciator panel. On newer fire alarm systems, you're required to have an approved graphic annunciator panel where the authority having jurisdiction will look at your building layout and say, yes, this is accurate, this makes sense. This is what fire department personnel are hopefully going to be able to understand when they enter that main lobby vestibule and look at this to figure out what's going on. A lot of good information on these. It's basically a building floor map and it also tells you what's in the building. If you look at what all the LED light indicators are on the graphic annunciator panel, you can very quickly understand what types of building systems are present and what advantages the building might be granting to us as responding personnel.
Yeah, we can do the question now.
So somebody asks about the activation of the sounding of the alarm, right? The alerting on different floors. Does it matter what kind of device it is, right? So in other words, you have a couple different actuator devices. Regardless, it would still have that same alerting plan, right?
Yeah, so in the context of fire alarm, there's basically 3 types of signals that we need to be concerned about, which are, of course, alarms, supervisory signals, and trouble signals. So supervisory and trouble signals won't generate an alarm. Only an actual alarm condition will do that. What types of devices that generate an alarm are dependent on, are they the purpose for life safety and evacuating people out of the building? Or is it just a supervisory to let you know, hey, like the high-low switch on the dry pipe system has been tripped? Generally speaking, things like your pull stations, smoke detectors, water flows will all generate alarm conditions to alert building occupants to evacuate. And if that initiating device is located on floor 8 and its emergency voice alarm system is programmed to alert the floor above, below, and the activation floor as well, then floors 7, 8, and 9 will be sent the notification to activate the strobes and alarms to evacuate those floors. But that's why you wouldn't get the other floors. Now, in older buildings that just have a global notification system in the building and not even strobes, it might just have bells like we saw here in number 4 and 118 Monroe, it's just going to do the whole building. It's not going to give you that kind of shelter-in-place stage evacuation that we're seeing is more beneficial in our response. It's a good question.
So I have a question. You might address an elevator. It's more of a comment/question, but I think it's a really important point for recognition, especially for backstep people, even company officers. Go into a building, and I'll ask especially newer people, hey, you walk into older unsprinklered high-rise, 120-volt, just alarm bells. Bells are ringing, the elevators are all in the lobby with the doors open. What is that telling you? Can you talk a little bit about the interface between elevators and fire alarms and how even an old building might have a sub-panel and how elevator devices kind of play into that, just real quick? I don't know if you're going to talk about that later.
So elevator recall is what I think you're referring to, Cap, where the elevators go to phase 1 recall, meet us on the lobby level, and the doors open up for our use to initiate phase 2 with our keys in the car and to drive the cars. It's important to note that the elevator code it's kind of its own thing too. So elevators have their own requirements to stay up to date with as well. One of them being, and it's a very important one, is that all elevator lobbies need to be provided with a smoke detector to initiate elevator recall. So even if you have an older building with just local like pull station bells, you might have a smoke detector that's activated that initiated the elevator recall. And when you see that, it's like, hey, we might have a condition on another floor. Let's see if we can find the fire alarm control unit or an annunciator panel if the building has one, to see what smoke detector may have been alarmed so we can pinpoint what the response might be.
Okay, so basically in a building with an elevator, regardless of age, it's going to have fire alarm initiating devices for the elevator, correct?
Elevator recall for fireman
In addition,
service.
gotcha.
Correct.
Right. Chief, do you have a question?
Yeah, I think this comes up a lot. So let's talk about a new building versus an old building, whatever. Does the smoke alarm in an individual apartment activate the building's fire alarm system?
Also a great question. So this is a good time to make the differentiation for everyone. What is a smoke alarm and what's a smoke detector? Smoke alarms they're initiating devices, but they're also alarming devices. And usually they're just the local indwelling unit in the bedroom, outside of the bedroom. We all see them in the apartments. That's just meant to alarm the residents of that unit. Smoke detectors are going to be the ones that you see like at the elevator lobbies that don't alarm themselves but activate the building's fire alarm. Yeah, that's a smoke detector. It's part of the fire alarm system. Now, smoke alarms, like dwelling unit smoke alarms, typically will not activate the building general alarm. However, sometimes they will be monitored. A good example here, one of my favorite graphic annunciator panels actually, is 50 Monroe Place. It's hard to see, but Cap, you might be able to see it there. One of the supervisory devices there is residential smoke.
Yep.
That's for residential smoke alarms. So if you have a dwelling unit residential smoke alarm activated, it will let you know on the graphic annunciator panel here. As
Food
a
on the stove
supervisory,
in apartment 609, that's going to be
Correct.
lit.
and it'll let you know with a little light there, hey, I do have an activated smoke alarm, because you wouldn't hear that from the lobby because the general alarm isn't activated. Now, of course, if the general alarm was activated, that would pop up there as a smoke detector because you had a smoke head like an elevator lobby that was tripped. It's a great question.
So I have some follow-up to that. So on the A shift, right, our fire at the Enclaves, I guess 2 shifts ago, right? That was a smoke alarm in that apartment that does not activate the building's fire alarm system. The call came from a neighbor in an adjoining apartment who heard that. There was nobody in that apartment that was on fire. Call came from the adjoining apartment. The neighbor heard that, opened her door, smelled something burning, called 911. ECC then processed that as a building fire, right? Full assignment building fire on that. But none of the smoke didn't activate the detector in the hallway because it didn't make it to the lobby because it was an end unit apartment, right? And so that was a case of, right, a building fire with no real activated alarm until somebody pulled the pull station.
Or you open the door to the apartment,
Yeah, and enough smoke come out.
comes out.
Yep.
Yeah, great example of, in play what it actually looks like, how it develops the incident, and how as responding units, we might need to make the decision, hey, do we need to manually activate the alarm? Do we need to hit a pull station to evacuate the building if it hasn't been done so already, if we recognize that we have a kitchen fire and only the smoke alarm in the unit has been activated?
Or is that going to do more harm than good in a building without
Exactly.
zoned evacuation? Do you want to dump the whole building, given the
Maybe
smoke,
shelter in
right?
place is better.
Yeah,
which I think
and
is
in
what
that
we use on
case, right, so that case, that was on the 18th floor, and the decision was, let's just try to keep people in their apartments, right, as opposed to getting them out into that hallway if we can, because it was going to be quick work, but it still was, you could contaminate that hallway quickly because of the delayed activation.
one. And that's a great example, too, of why understanding the type of fire alarm system the building has is critical for pre-planning, so do I want to do that or not? Maybe hitting a pull station on that floor is good because it's just going to do the floor above, below, and the fire floor. But if you do it at the Enclave and you hit a pull station
In the lobby.
and it does the entire building and now you can't even get into the stairways, is that really something that we want to do? right? These are all parts of the pre-plan and what we need to be thinking about when we're walking through the buildings. It's also a great piece of feedback there. So moving off from fire alarms, we'll talk now about inter-exit stairways. Of course, these are probably one of the most simple things that we interact with as fire department personnel, but also one that it does beg us to really understand what the requirements are and what we're looking at. Thank you. A big code change that we've seen in recent history as well is no longer allowing interlocking stairs to be considered as two separate means of egress. We still see them, of course, in our building construction, like here at 51 Monroe Street, the tallest building in the city of Rockville, and then also on the right side, 4 and 118 Monroe Street. These are interlocking stairways. And knowing that when you're in an interlocking stair, you are really in a stair shaft comprising of two separate stairs is important, because otherwise they can be very confusing in the layout, because you get off on one side on one floor, you go up one level, you're on the other side on the other floor. And the doors to the stairs alternate on each side. They're separate stairs, but they're really contained within the same shaft. And the easiest evidence of them is when you can see the separate set of stair runs within the same shaft, but separated by the intermediate wall there. And these are interlocking stairs, not scissor stairs, which more colloquially refer to when there is no demising wall between them and they're not physically separated. Also important for our operations is to identify identification signage. So current building code requires inter-exit stairways to be provided with inter-exit stairway signage, while also existing buildings are also required to be provided with signage, although the requirements are not the same. The general gist of it is know that it's supposed to identify the current level, the level of exit discharge, and whether or not there's fire department roof access. And here you can see an example on the right of signage that's compliant that shows all this information. It's also important because it shows you what levels you can access from that stairway, because especially with new building construction, number 44 number 44 Maryland Avenue, the Ansel 44 apartment is a good example. Not all the interior exit stairways from the ground level go all the way to the penthouse, top floor. Some terminate at the 9th floor. And then if you took that stairway up, you'd have to transfer and go to another stairway up, depending on when you get out of the elevator, what stairs you take up. So reading the signage first thing when you enter an interior exit stairway is critical, so you know, hey, this is not going to take me to where I want to go. This one says 8 through roof. Well, transfer to stair 1 for exit access, that tells me that 8 and below, I transfer to a different stair designation. Yeah. When I'm calling out my attack stairway, hey, it's not actually going to be stair 6 for someone that's on a different level. Knowing this is important during pre-plan, but also during the operation.
Would signage on the first floor be any different than here on the 11th floor?
It would look very similar, except that on the first floor, if that was the level of exit discharge, it would say discharge this level, exit this level. Yeah, but it would have the same information required on all levels in your exit stairway. Correct. This is a fun photo too. This is from 2100 block of Baltimore. These are garden-style apartments, and from the front, you get in like at an intermediate level, there's a terrace-level apartment, and you see the open stairway to all the units. But unless you look for it, you wouldn't see the exit sign in the back that takes you to an interior exit stairway behind. Each of these buildings has 2 stairways, essentially. One for unit access, and an interior exit stairway in the back side of the building that's a protected means of egress, but also could be for our operations. No standpipes in this building, though, but it's important to know when you're stretching, hey, maybe going into the protected interior exit stairway might be a better idea. These are unsprinklered buildings. We'll talk about fire doors now. So fire doors, again, are a relatively simple thing to discuss, but there are some critical components of fire doors that we need to pay attention to during operations and also for pre-planning. The most basic requirement of a fire door is that it has to be self or automatically closing and latching. It makes sense. A fire door is useless, can't do its job unless it's actually closed. A good example of that is the Arrive Silver Spring, the infamous incident that was a fatality. I noticed that many of the stairway doors, many of the fire doors in the stairs did not have any latching mechanisms. I assume that they were removed by the building management because maybe they're getting stuck, maybe residents complain that they have to twist the handle to get in and out. Whatever it was, those aren't compliant fire doors because they can't keep themselves shut. Under back pressure from fire conditions, if you're just getting hot smoke into the stairway, what good is that stair? On the right here, we can see other things that can happen to fire doors. Even something as simple as an automatic close on a fire door can get stuck. In this case, the bottom of the door was rubbing on the flooring material of the stair. Again, if a stair door is stuck open, it's not going to do its job protecting us and the building occupants trying to evacuate. It's also important to note with fire doors that we will see fire doors in our built environment that we might not know what they're for, at least on a surface level. And depending on the building's height, area, and then use will determine how the building might be compartmentalized or constructed as separate buildings. I've gotten a lot of people ask me, hey, why does the huge donut style construction on Teachers Way in 8's area, why is it so many different addresses? Why is it broken up? Why are the doors in the corridors? It's because the building was constructed actually as multiple buildings from a codes perspective. But from our operations perspective, it's not really separate buildings. We're interacting with the same way. It's compartmentalized with these fire door assemblies that are on self or automatic closers. And a self closer is one that swings shut as soon as you let it go. Automatic closers are like the mag releases that we see that have to have an initiating device, like a smoke detector most commonly, to release that device on the fire alarm. So you can see in all these fire doors that we have here, these are all automatic closing on mag releases, and they're provided with smoke heads on both sides of the door to automatically release those magnets to preserve that fire resistance rated enclosure.
So are we finding these on larger buildings? And I mean, we go to some buildings where you're like, I've walked 600 feet and we're not to the apartment yet.
Yep. Yeah, like Mallory Square, Siesta Key Way, Teachers Way, all these other donut-style constructions where you're like, get out of the elevator and you're like, oh my gosh, like I'm walking across the entire lot of land to get to this unit. Yeah, that's more commonly we're going to see it. I'm glad you brought it up though, because a good example of sometimes it won't always be that case is in the middle photo here. This is 3500 block of Bellflower Lane, these newer 5-story apartment buildings. They're only 8 units per floor. Like this photo in the middle, I'm standing in the middle of the back half of that corridor, but you can see the other end there. Not a large building at all. But these were provided fire doors actually for accessible means of egress requirements so that there's an area of refuge provided for occupants requiring rescue assistance, like wheelchair bound or disabled occupants. So not always are you going to see fire doors only in larger buildings, but also other contexts. On the left there, those fire doors are provided as a smoke barrier to compartmentalize the building into smoke compartments as a requirement of its use as an assisted living facility. That's 55 West Goody, the Seneca.
You okay with that, or do you need a little more?
Yeah, 10 minutes?
Well, we can certainly.
Yeah, we got it.
Okay.
So I guess the general takeaway here is that you will see fire doors all over the place. There'll be places that you'll see fire doors commonly, like larger donut-style buildings, fire doors and stairs, of course, but also you'll see fire doors in places like, I don't know why that's there. Well, there is a purpose for it, even though if it's not visible on the surface.
And I'll say more of like okay, you keep, I'll finish that. When you're done with
Okay.
fire doors, if you don't bring it up, I'll.
So another thing about fire doors is that they're classified as an opening protective, which is an opening in a fire resistance rated construction, a fire barrier, a firewall, what have you. They don't always have to be swinging type fire doors. So here we have Marlowe in Rockville, and the showroom in Marlowe, it's all storage, it's all furniture storage. So it is compartmentalized based on the area of the space. But they've elected to, of course, not divide the showroom up with just little swinging type doors, but rather to use these sliding wand type doors. These are like accordion style doors that go side to side. And again, you have a smoke head to activate the door when it initiates. And upon fire alarm, these doors will shut. It's important to know where these are in a building because we go through these buildings when there's a non-alarm condition, typically. Like if we go to a service call or we're here for a med local and we walk through this building, it looks completely different than when the fire alarm's going off and the smoke heads activate and then close the doors up. Now we suddenly have a building that's completely subdivided and it's like, oh, it looks completely different. These types of doors, if they're required for means of egress, will allow you to push button and open them side to side. Chief, is there a question?
There is. So I'm just going to give a warning to the people watching that we may go over a few minutes. It won't be 15 minutes, but so here's a good question that came up, and I think this is important. Somebody asked, can you speak to a protect-in-place building like a hospital as compared to our common terminology about protect-in-place or shelter-in-place, right? So like on the Enclave the other day, we talked about, hey, just shelter those people in place. But if we go to a hospital, and I believe even some of the high schools, the new high schools have a protect-in-place for the rooms that have the disabled folks that can't get out.
Yeah, great question. So just to kind of repeat what I'm understanding the question is speak to how buildings are compartmentalized to help us with the shelter-in-place ideology during an incident. So like the photo on the left from 55 West Goody, the Seneca, that's an assisted living building. The requirements there are very similar to that of hospitals as well, where the building needs to be separated into smoke areas so that if there's a fire incident in one area, it won't cause smoke to go to the other wing of the building. Most of our hospitals, if not all in Montgomery County, have this in place, and that's why we see a lot of these intermediate doors as well to compartmentalize, to allow us a shelter in place, so that if there's a fire incident in one portion of the building, we can move occupants from that portion of the building either out of the building or to another protected area of the building. Because in these types of occupancies, whether it be nursing homes, assisted livings, or hospitals, it's not practical to be able to evacuate everyone. You just can't do it. And that's why the code is written the way that it is, to recognize that we need to do that. We have to shelter in place because we don't have another option. To get everyone out of the building, it would take too long to really quantify that as a viable option.
So
I
are
hope that
nursing
answers your
homes
question.
and assisted livings, for example, would they, probably nursing homes, do the same thing?
Yep, similar
Those doors
requirements.
are on magnetic
Correct.
openers and.
And they're separated into smoke zones. And like at 55 West Goody, it's not a huge assisted living building. You go up there, you get out of the elevator, and you see like a couple of corridor wings, but each one of them has these automatic closing doors, and you recognize, oh, that's to compartmentalize this building, this floor, and these residential wings, so that if there's an incident in one, I can just move people to another area, as long as I keep those doors shut.
I guess one thing to think about that, so Chief Kerrigan is the one that brought that up, but from a command officer perspective, right? So in those buildings that have the designated protect in place, right? The hospital where you can't move people, some of these nursing facilities, people are not ambulatory. They often rely on staff to help them protect in place. Whereas when we talk about shelter in place, I'll go back to the enclaves, right? We're keeping those people where they are, but probably with fire department people with them, right? So we have somebody in the fire department across from the apartment that's on fire and they're panicking. We may end up assigning somebody, hey, I need you to go in that apartment and just hang out with them. That happened at 8750, I believe. We put some fire department people in those apartments with people. They sheltered in place, but it wasn't a design to protect in place. Whereas Holy Cross Hospital, Silver Spring, right, that staff is going to stay with those people and use the features of that building to protect those people in place as long as the fire's not in that compartment. Assume that's right, yes.
Yep, great input.
I'll throw out my plug for
Yeah.
doors real quick too, so it kind of applies to that. So doors are obviously a big deal to us, right? We talk about door control when we're forcing
Yeah.
the door. We talk about, we carry door chocks, spring clamps, all that kind of stuff to help us keep doors open. And we talk about, controlling the flow path and all that stuff. So I'd say it's incumbent while we're going to everybody watching, right? The companies, the firefighters, you're going around looking at these buildings. Now that we can recognize, hey, these are fire doors, we know why they're there. They're there for a reason. Some have the mag holders. Older buildings, you go to 525 Thayer Avenue, right? They have fire doors, but they're just on automatic closers. They're new modern fire alarm system there all the time. You walk through, they're always chocked open. Do yourself a favor, take the chock out, right? It could save us, it could save somebody else an hour later when you come back and that building's on fire. If somebody gives you anything, well, now you can educate them, hey, well, this is why we're doing it. I'm not saying get in a fight with somebody, but there might be a reason why it's done. But if you're just walking through, and people do it all the time, like I said, it's not convenient to have to open the door all the time. Well, make it safer for yourself and everybody else. You're coming back in an hour. It's automatic closer is not working. Write it up, right? You know what I mean? Like send something to the fire code compliance. It's easy to do, and it could save us or somebody else just a little.
Absolutely, and I think in my experience, witnessing the same thing, we see doors chocked all over time. A lot of time it's like janitorial, custodial, or security staff that they just don't know. They don't know that it's a fire door. They don't know that that's not supposed to be chocked open. But if you just tell them, hey, this is a fire door, it needs to be able to swing shut, or it needs to be able to just stay shut, then they go, oh, I didn't know that, right? So a lot of it is just education and having conversations with the building engineers or staff or maintenance about that. That was great input, thanks, Cap. So this is the last slide about fire doors, I promise, but this is just another example of different types of opening protectives that are a little bit more well hidden that are still existing in our built environment. This is 4747 Bethesda Avenue. Beautiful, gorgeous, tiered atrium going throughout, and I just got the 0-minute sign from Chief, so we'll speed this up.
We're going a little over.
Yeah.
We're okay.
So the reason why these opening protectors are provided here is actually to get them out of requiring a smoke control system, which is in part 2 at a later date. But the premise here is that you might not notice these at first glance, right? These are tucked away. You see these 2 tracks in the columns and the opening there. When the smoke heads are activated, those 2 smoke curtains drop, and those create your fire resistance rated separation from one volume to the next. And so when you're responding to this building and those are activated, it'll look completely different than when you're doing a walkthrough during a non-alarm condition. So things to
Do
look
all of those have overrides?
If it's required for means of egress, it'll have an option for personnel to use to get through. A lot of these kind of top-down, drop-down smoke curtains or fire curtains, they will have a handle at the bottom to lift. Worst case scenario, you could cut through them. A lot of them are fabric. If they're metal, you're probably not going to be able to pick it up. You're probably not going to be able to cut through it. But it's also not supposed to be a door that we're going through then.
Okay.
Because sometimes you will see, like, rolling steel fire doors are another common opening protective method. So this is our last topic. We'll blast through this real quick. So I'm not going to read all the words on the screen, but when I say elevator hoistway opening protectives, that's basically a mouthful way of just saying another way to protect the elevator shafts. So older buildings will not have these. They won't have any sort of elevator or hoistway opening protective, but depending on the height and then use of the building, modern buildings do. So that's why we see in older buildings, like on the left, unsprinklered, 4118 Monroe Street in Rockville, this is the top floor, there's no elevator lobby. But in other residential high-rises or other high-rises in general, we do see elevator lobbies, like on the right here, with automatically closing doors, again, that release on the fire alarm or upon smoke detection, the elevator lobby to protect the elevator hoistways. The methods of elevator hoistway opening protection are not just requiring a lobby, but there's other methods to do so as well. On the left, we do have a lobby, but it's not very obvious because it doesn't have swinging type automatic closing fire doors. Rather, you can see it tucked away in the left two photos, another drop down opening protective, like a fire curtain type of assembly that drops and encloses that. But you wouldn't notice that if you didn't walk through and you didn't find out and realize, hey, this is a newer building. This probably should have elevator hoistway opening protectives. How is it provided? And you can see there. On the right here, again, this is 55 West Goody, the Seneca Rockville, and they require elevator hoistway opening protectives too based on its use. First glance, you say, oh, there is no elevator lobby, right? But then if you look closer, you can see these two tracks around the sills of the elevator. This is what it actually looks like in place. And on the right photo, you can see what one looks like deployed. This was during commissioning of the building. This is something that most of our personnel have probably never touched or never even seen before. And so when you're riding the elevator up to a floor and you see that the elevator car doors open up and you see a plastic saran wrap sheet in front of you, right, that's there for a reason. That's as a secondary means of protection for the hoistway. And you can see there that it actually has a push button sensor on the middle. You just push it and you can go right through. Or there's actually a manual lift on the bottom. You can lift it up as an alternate method if the powered operation isn't working to get through. These are, again, just a secondary means of protection for the elevator hoistway to prevent smoke and fire from traveling into the hoistway onto other levels. So that's all I had in part one. Hopefully I didn't go too much over, but I did also want to open up the floor to any questions or discussion about any of the topics. We can flip back and
Anything else
field
from
any
the chat,
questions.
Chief?
There was a question earlier about exterior stairways, if they had to be labeled. Exterior exit stairways.
It's a good question, actually. So we don't see too many exterior exit stairways in Montgomery County, but they do exist. Signage, I think signage is not required on the exterior side, and if so, it doesn't have to be the same requirement as interior exit stairway signage, although I'm not speaking with too much confidence on that one. Regardless, with an exterior exit stairway, completely different implications are involved there as well, right? You can kind of see where you're going. You can see how far up you're going in the building and where you can access. There may be stairway signage requirements. In fact, I think there are, but I think they're different from the interior exit stairway signage requirements. Let's see. Yes. A sign shall be provided at each floor landing in an interior exit stairway. So that, I think their requirements are different from exterior exit stairways, if needed to be provided. But that's a great question.
It looks like it on our end here.
All right, Captain, you got any?
The only thing I had that we didn't touch is so way back when you talked about standpipes and sprinkler systems in the beginning, just again for people in the back, we're talking about fire pumps briefly. So is there any, I guess, things or quick tips you'd give to the backstep firefighter who's going to hook up to a standpipe system in a building equipped with a fire pump, say 18th floor of a high rise with a fire pump, just to be aware of, like, I've been there before. Somebody opened the wheel, hook up the line to the riser valve, open the wheel. Like, oh, we don't have any pressure. Maybe their driver hasn't charged the connections yet. The fire pump hasn't kicked on. What should they expect? How long should they expect for it to take for the fire pump to kick on and give them that pressure? And what could they do to help accelerate that potentially?
So the way fire pumps are activated for an automatic system is that the fire pump downstream of the fire pump itself, there's a static pressure maintained in the system. And when that static pressure drops to a certain threshold, it'll initiate the fire pump and just drive the fire pump at a set speed. So for a sprinkler system, right, that's very obvious, right? You have a discharge sprinkler head, you lose that static pressure in the piping, the fire pump sensing line says, oh, we dropped below 125 PSI, I gotta kick on, and it'll kick on to keep up. The same happens when you open up a automatic standpipe system fire hose valve, because the fire pump doesn't know if it was a sprinkler head that opened up or the fire hose valve. All it knows is it lost its pressure. So the fire pump, if it is providing pressure for an automatic standpipe system, will kick on to provide that pressure for that fire hose valve. Now, in that incident, maybe it was not actually an automatic standpipe system. Maybe it was a manual standpipe system. So you were just getting city pressure at best, or you weren't even connected to the city line, right? Like maybe it was just a manual dry system like over there on the left in the parking garage, where you're completely reliant on the fire department to pressurize that.
And there may be a little delay of a couple seconds
Yeah.
or something like that, right? You know, you open
pipe's
the
gotta
wheel,
fill.
right? It takes a second for that flow switch to set a pressure sensing switch to kick the fire pump on. So there may be a couple seconds, right?
Yeah, I mean, think of how long it takes from when the driver opens up that cross-lay discharge to when you can watch the water move through the hose line.
Right.
We'll put that on the scale of a lot of these standpipe systems where you have hundreds and hundreds of more feet of pipe to fill, and it's larger too. It can take a little bit of time to get there, yeah.
We're good?
We are.
Well, Chris, thank you very much for
thank
coming
you.
in.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks.
We look forward to scheduling part 2. Hopefully it'll be sooner than later. We'll have to work with Chief Gibson to do that. But until then, if anybody out there, if you have questions or comments or concerns, you have a county email address, right?
I don't actually, but I have my email. I can distribute somehow.
Well, send them to me,
yeah.
then I'll make sure that
Or
you
everyone,
get it.
yeah. I mean, shout out to guys at Company 3. They're great. I mean, you can get in contact with anyone there, and they can give you my information if you ever want to text, call, or email me. There's plenty of people in the county from other firehouses that have like shot me a text of a photo of something like, hey, what is this, or why is this here? And I'm happy to answer.
This all kind of started from the from Company 23, right? This whole presentation, did it not?
Yeah, actually, that was one of my driving initiatives, because at the 5901 Montrose, we identified deficiencies in the standpipe system. I was like, well, maybe I can bring this to a wider audience of what things we should be looking out for during pre-planning, and then brought it to the scale of, hey, here's good background information to bridge the gap between our fire service personnel and the built environment of what these fire service features look like and how we interface with them.
Well,
So
thank you for
exactly
doing that, and again, we look forward to part 2.
Thank you.
The only thing that I have really before we go is the end of this month, on September 26th, we do have a boss talk coming up. It's about an apartment fire. And the thing that was particular about that, it is a lithium-ion battery fire. So we are bringing in Captain Riley and Captain Foss to talk about that. So until then, thank you for tuning in, and be safe.